Support for this podcast comes from Vonq. Vonq supports global enterprises worldwide, driving efficient hiring through AI-powered job distribution and recruitment intelligence. Vonq recently unveiled Echo, a new AI agent ecosystem designed to make overwhelmed TA teams and outdated funnels a thing of the past. Echo rebuilds the hiring process for speed, clarity, and fairness without losing human control. To find out more, go to vonq.com. And Vonq is spelled V-O-N-Q. That's vonq.com.
There's been more of scientific discovery, more of technical advancement and material progress in your lifetime and mine than in all the ages of history.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Recruiting Future Roundup Live. If you've not listened or watched Roundup before, it's the episode of the show where we look at all of the interviews that were on in the previous month and do a bit of a dive in to see what the guests were talking about, share the insights, so you can decide whether you want to go back and listen to those episodes or even listen to them again if you've already listened to them. Thank you so much for joining us live. It's so great when we get to do this live and talk it through. And this week I am joined by a fantastic co-host. Hi Ritu, how are you? Good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
Absolute pleasure. Now, can you introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do?
I'm Ritu. I work at Vonq, and Vonq actually sits at a really interesting intersection right now. We work with enterprise organizations and staffing companies to sort of almost help them rethink how they find, attract, and assess candidates right at the top of the funnel, Matt. Through our hiring API Happy ecosystem, we sit directly into or inside the ATS workflow, connecting employers to media channels, social, data, niche channels, and of course, AI capabilities more and more. And what makes us different is that we're not just another job distribution platform. We've been more focused on how AI can help build much better signals about candidates earlier in the process. So not to screen people out faster, but to help recruiters really understand how they're looking at how are they looking at data or candidates with more confidence and less noise.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting stuff that you've been working on. And it's particularly good to have you because the episodes that we're looking at, which were published in February, are all very AI heavy. So it'd be great to get your perspective on some of the topics. So let's start with episode 766, which is called How TA Proves Its Business Impact. It's an interview with Bharat Sanyanya, who is the VP of People and Culture at Elmo Software. Now, covered a lot of ground in this particular conversation, and there was some really interesting stuff around skills, but particularly some interesting stuff around the metrics that TA uses to measure itself. And that really kind of related back to the title in terms of, are the metrics that TA are using actually proving its business impact, or should we be looking at something else as TA kind of develops and evolves? I mean, Ritu, what were your thoughts on this particular one?
I loved this episode, Matt. Speed metrics were never the right North Star. They just happened to be the easiest things to count. And that's why this resonated so much for me. As things like time to hire or cost to hire tells you how fast the machine is running. They tell you nothing at all about whether it's running in the right direction. And Bharat calls them hygiene metrics, and that's exactly right. They're the floor, not the ceiling. And the real question is, did this hire change the performance trajectory, or capability or risk profile of the business? That's the conversation TA needs to be having with the C-suite. And right now, most TA functions don't have that data to have that conversation.
No, absolutely. And I think it's important to talk about it because, what I can see evolving now is through AI, through the way that software works, through the way that, things can work a lot better together and AI can look at data. Very soon, a lot of employers will have access to that data. And to me, it's kind of really important that TA is kind of ahead of the curve there to push for that and get the metrics that they need.
Absolutely. Sorry,
yeah.
Matt.
No, carry on.
No, I just had a thought that I'd add to Bharat's dashboard that almost nobody tracks, which is actually recruiter confidence at point of shortlist. Do actually recruiters feel genuinely they understand the candidates they're putting forward? Do they actually understand them? And if that number is low, everything downstream suffers. Interview quality, hiring manager trust, offer acceptance, retention, and it becomes almost a leading indicator hiding in plain sight.
I think that's a really interesting point. And there was some interesting stuff there as well about talking about focusing much more on skills and outcomes versus job titles when recruiting. So it's a really, really interesting conversation and definitely one that I would recommend. Let's move on to the next one, episode 767, inside EY's talent strategy for AI and the future. Now, always great to talk to people from EY's talent team, EY's global talent team. I've always found them really kind of innovative in the way that they think about talent. So it was great to have Sandra Oliver on the show, who is the global assurance talent lead at EY. This was a really wide-ranging conversation, but there were sort of two key themes that came out of it. And we'll kind of take them one by one. So the first one was about how EY are branding not just themselves as an employer, but assurance as a career. For a new generation coming into the workforce. So some great work in terms of really understanding how people are thinking about work, how the early careers talent that they want to bring into their business thinks about their career, and really join the dots between what they do and those kind of needs, and really illustrating that this is a great career for people and that it's evolving. So some really kind of great and interesting employer brand work there, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how they are doing a genuinely fascinating work around which more organizations, in our opinion, should be paying attention to it. So they're not just marketing EY as a great place to work. They're really repositioning what an audit or assurance career means in the age of AI. They're almost rewriting the value proposition for the entire profession. They lead with audit as a platform for business leadership, exposure to ESG, cyber risk, AI governance, and that's completely different sort of a conversation from come work for us, great benefits, good salary. And
Absolutely.
Gen Z particularly is pragmatic about work in a way that older generations sometimes misread as disloyal. They're not disloyal, they're just clear-eyed. They want to know the deal up front. They want to know, will I earn enough? What will I become? Where will I go? What will I know? And I think these organizations like EY, what AI is doing, will win their commitment because they're honest enough to tell them and also whose reality matches the story they're selling to. And I think that's truly fascinating what EY is doing.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I think the other part of the conversation that sort of, is related to that was the impact of the AI is having on jobs in that area of their work. So, as you say, it's actually quite dramatic. It's changing the type of work that they do, and it's changing how they do that work. And I think in a world where all we sort of tend to hear about AI changing jobs is people not recruiting or people being laid off or whatever it is, there's very little narrative around upskilling and reskilling, which is essential for every company's workforce because things are changing so quickly. So a really interesting piece there about how they're upskilling all of their workforce to be able to kind of embrace AI effectively in what they're doing, and they're thinking very carefully about that in terms of different approaches to learning, different ways of thinking, different generations in the workforce. So it was just great to hear a company actually talking about that because not many are at the moment. What do you think? I couldn't
agree more, Matt. The organizations laying people off for AI efficiency are beginning to create a talent debt they'll spend years repaying. And that's the reality. The whole skills you lose in a layoff don't come back easily. the institutional knowledge, the experience, the client relationships, the culture carriers, those walk out the door and AI doesn't replace them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a great interview, and thanks very much for Sandra for coming on the show and sharing what they were doing. We're jumping to episode 769. Now, as the host of Recruiting Future, I am not allowed to have favorite episodes, and that's a very clear rule that I have. However, if I did have a favorite episode this month, or certainly a favorite conversation that I had, this would probably be it. So 769, managing risk in talent acquisition, discussion with the brilliant Kyle Lagunas, founder of Kyle & Co. Back on the show. He's been on the show several times. It's the first time he's been on with his new business. And there was just so much in this conversation. I mean, Ritu, what did you think of some of the things we talked about?
Well, as you say, you're not allowed to say your favorite episode. I have to say we have a lot to say about what Kyle said, and we so fundamentally agree with some of the points he made. Vonq's position on this is really direct and a little bit provocative maybe, but before you ask whether your AI screening is fair, actually ask whether your manual screening was fair. In most cases, nobody has ever audited their manual processes.
Yeah.
There are organizations who were confidently avoiding AI in the name of fairness, while their manual shortlisting process had structural bias baked in through years of unchallenged practice. So the AI would have been more consistent and more auditable, more transparent. They just didn't know because they'd never looked. And risk avoidance masked as responsibility.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the risk part was a really kind of enlightening bit of the conversation. So we were talking about the difference between being risk averse and risk avoidant. And really, the kind of the underlying trend in talent acquisition and HR has always been around being risk avoidant. And it is a really interesting time because there are significant risks out there with AI, particularly if people don't know what's happening, or they choose the wrong provider, or they put it in the wrong place. There are significant ethical, regulatory, legal risks going on here. At the same time, this is a massively disruptive, innovative time. So if companies, as you say, continue to be risk avoidant, it's actually far more damaging than being risk averse. And and we dug into what being risk averse means. And Kyle's big kind of theme is around defensibility. So being able to understand the decisions that AI is helping you make. And I know that's something that's really important to Vonq, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. We have built human in the loop as an absolute design principle. Those aren't just lofty words, not a feature. Every recruiter using our AI early screening has meaningful visibility into why a candidate has been assessed the way they have, with not just a score, but the reasoning behind it. Because a recruiter who doesn't understand the basis for a recommendation can't possibly exercise genuine judgment. They just rubber stamping. And rubber stamping, it turns out, is not what courts or regulators mean by oversight. So yes, we have a big point of view around this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other points he made that I did I was at an event early in the week, and I chaired a panel with two lawyers talking about, in fact, Ritu was in the audience, talking about this kind of thing. And I think we also need to realize that the legal profession is struggling with this as well, because it's so new. And it's just this sense of, working together, but also illustrating that you are trying your best to be responsible and defensible was kind of a big was a sort of a big thing. A big thing here. And then I think there were lots of things to talk about in this episode, but I think the other thing that I want to pull out is we talked about pilot programs and how in the past, sometimes doing pilot programs with technology, it's just like, we were just in a trial. There's no real robustness to the measurement and all that sort of stuff. And, Kyle was saying that he's seeing companies now take pilots very, very seriously, look very carefully at what they're trying to achieve, how they measure it, and really using them to gain the insight they need to move forward. I mean, do you find that with your customers?
We do to an extent, Matt. But I think there's still this whole risk avoidance piece that comes into play. And I also think that most folks or companies who are conducting pilots, they ask the question, does this technology work? The question they should really answer is, can this organization actually change? And Kyle draws upon this distinction really cleanly. Successful pilots build organizational trust and test really the change management piece, not just the technology. And that means involving recruiters from the design phase, not handing them a finished product saying, hey, use it. It means really measuring recruiter confidence and adoption quality alongside efficiency metrics. And it means really having leadership buy-in and genuinely endorse and commit before the pilot starts, not waiting to see if it succeeds at first. If they start with if and not when, pilots will never be successful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It was a really interesting sort of point to talk about. Let's move on to the next one. So episode 770, called The Science of Better Hiring, a conversation with Dr. Stephanie Puckett, who runs her own business, Synergy Mind Consulting. Really, really interesting conversation. Over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, I've been, absolutely fascinated by talking to people who are experts in this particular area, because, I really don't think we talk about the science of selection enough, and it's great to kind of have that conversation. There was sort of again a couple of things that came out of it. The first one for me was why hiring fails. And it was, Stephanie was really talking about how not enough work actually gets done to understand what the right person, looks like, what they're going to do. People are relying on, job descriptions they've had for years, and not actually putting the right information into the process. And the implications of that were narrowing your funnel right at the top, and B, potentially having a mishire, or perhaps the worst one was hiring someone who has a very distorted and fake picture of what the job is and what the expectations are, and the damage that can do, not necessarily just to the employer, but also, to the kind of the mental health of that person trying to succeed in an environment that they're never going to succeed because they've kind of had the wrong information through the process. What did you think about that aspect of it?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Stephanie's point about, competency frameworks being someone else's philosophy of leadership is one of the most important observations for me in that episode. And the assessment tools are often fine, but the criteria they've been applied against are frequently borrowed, generic, or actually a little bit outdated. And I think the work that has to be done by organizations before any AI screening tools get deployed is, what does genuinely successful performance look like in that specific role, in that specific organization, in that specific team? And just to give you an example, Matt, when we started deploying our AI screening across 3 of our development partners, one of them were a financial services bank headquartered in Germany, and they had a very niche role in Berlin, which was a really hard to find candidates for. When we started deploying AI screening for that specific role, we actually went back and looked at least, I don't remember the number of CVs or LinkedIn profiles we looked at, but we actually went back and looked at many successful profiles for that specific role at that particular company to really go back and say what success looks like before we even deployed our AI screening. And I think that is why we work with customers on role signal design before we deploy anything. The technology conversation is really secondary. The first conversation should always be, what are you actually trying to find out about this person and why? And without that clarity, you're applying AI or even manual screening or interviews to an undefined problem and expecting it to return defined answer for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's that was a real key thing for me as well. It was kind of, it's not just about using assessment technology. It's really kind of understanding what you're doing. And I think the other point that we sort of touched on around this was Obviously, we're kind of living in a time where people are trying to be more predictive about things like performance, and I can see that kind of really accelerating over the next few years as we try and sort of bring science and art and magic to hiring in new ways. And Stephanie was talking about potential tension between sort of data science and psychology here, where the numbers can say one thing, and you can kind of find any kind of view in them, and then the science of psychology says something else about whether someone's going to perform. Sure, I'm fascinated to get your take on that in terms of what Vonq does.
So our assessments, Vonq's really sort of our assessments are built on established psychometric science. We start with validated psychological constructs that predict performance in a given role, so very specific to a role, or role type, and apply them consistently. So we're not deriving screening criteria by pattern matching on historical hire data. That's slower to build. It's also far more defensible, which is legally, ethically, and practically. And I think the other thing is data science. I always say that data science finds actual patterns. Psychology actually asks whether those patterns are meaningful, whether it's fair or casual. So you need both. And so the right balance of not having the right balance could actually be quite dangerous.
No, absolutely. And I think it's a really interesting point. I'd not heard it mentioned too often either. So it was good to kind of surface that conversation. Moving on to the next one, episode 771, Recruiting at the Speed of AI. A conversation with Satya Kamat, who is the Chief Product Officer at Eightfold. Again, really interesting conversation. We were really talking about the limits of the existing hiring process, and this is a topic that's come up a few times actually in the last couple of months in various different interviews. So really exploring the fact that the way that we've always done recruiting with resumes and interviews and shortlists is designed around human capacity. It's designed around the fact that there's only so many resumes a recruiter can read. There's only so many interviews a hiring manager can do. So you kind of have that restriction bolted into the way recruiting works. And in the conversation, we were sort of exploring, well, actually, if AI takes away that restriction, how might recruiting evolve, and how could it be better? So I'm sure it's a conversation that's sort of very top of your radar as well. What did you think?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think Satya's observation is structurally correct and genuinely a really important one. The opportunity Vonq is focused on is use that removal of human bandwidth constraints to give more candidates a genuine opportunity to show who they are, not to process them out faster, but to understand them better. And there's a real fundamental difference between we can now screen 2,000 candidates in a day to we can now give 2,000 candidates a meaningful early intersection or interaction that generates real signal. And the first is really efficiency. The second is really transformation.
I think that's really interesting because this is kind of currently, this was up last week as a post on LinkedIn to get people to listen to it, and there was pushback in the comments around the emphasis on speed, which is my fault because I came up with the title, and actually the conversation is much more than just about speed. But it did get me thinking that we've always said, well, you can have speed or you can have quality, you can't have both, and I think that this is actually about doing things more efficiently and quicker, but also better. I think perhaps AI can give us both of those things. What do you think?
Completely. Couldn't agree more. I just reframe that. Perhaps the goal shouldn't be to remove time from the process, even though that's an important, helpful metric. It should be remove waste or wasted time.
Agreed.
And sometime in a hiring process, doing the real work is giving candidates space to reflect, giving hiring managers the room to compare meaningfully, giving recruiters time to actually build those relationships that change whether an offer gets accepted or not. So the question is, which time is wasted and which is valuable? So collapsing everything in the name of speed really risks this throwing out the valuable time along with the wasted time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important important point. I mean, I've had a couple of people on the show sort of talking through case studies in frontline hiring where they want to hire people quickly, and they've taken their time to hire down from 2 weeks to 3 days. And a really interesting conversation with one restaurant company, and they were like, "We actually discovered we could do it in a day, but we don't want to." Because of exactly that. We need time to reflect. The candidate needs time to reflect. So, we're comfortable that we've taken it down to, we've halved the time it's taking us, but actually we're comfortable that is the right thing. Because, ultimately we're dealing with humans, and humans, humans need time. So I think that's kind of very important. So yeah, really interesting conversation. And I'd say it's spurred some really interesting discussions. Okay, so last one, episode 772, Surfing the AI Tsunami. Great conversation with Jagriti Singh, who's a former CPO and basically sort of specializes in, transformations, done some really interesting work around AI and talent. Again, wide-ranging, really interesting perspective. A lot of the conversation was about AI's impact on jobs and the importance of kind of workforce planning as we kind of move forward. What did you take from this conversation?
Yeah, it was an interesting one. I actually, so what did I take from that conversation? Probably, the question isn't that can we automate this or automate anything? Everything is automatable, if that's a word in theory. Yes. Question is really, what do we lose if we do? And most organizations aren't asking that second question. So I think for me, that was probably the one that I took away the most from that conversations. I think that.
Yeah, and I think that's really the most important point. She was talking about using I think it was called the Humble work scale. She does a lot of work with universities looking into this, and it's kind of looking at automation across the board and working out where it's appropriate and where it's not appropriate. And to me, I think that is an excellent discussion for talent acquisition at the moment in terms of trying to understand what's appropriate, what's not appropriate to automate. We could automate the entire recruiting process and do it in half an hour if we wanted to, but that would not be a good thing, would it?
No, not at all. So if you think about version 1 of a process, the transactional recruiter whose value is in moving process, whether it's scheduling, status updates, basic screening, coordination, that work is already being automated and the trend will accelerate, no doubt. If that's where your recruiter's time is going, you have a structural problem regardless of what you think about AI. Version 2 is really the strategic recruiter whose value is in judgment and relationships and business partnerships and employer branding, and understanding where the hiring managers actually needs or what they need versus what's been asked for. So building those genuine relationships with candidates in competitive markets, exercising the kind of contextual intelligence no algorithm will ever be able to replicate. And that role is not going away. It's becoming even more important and more differentiated.
Absolutely, I think that is the best takeaway, I think, from talking about these episodes this month. So, Ritu, thank you very much for joining me and adding your perspectives to this. Lots of great interviews coming up on Recruiting Future in the next month. So make sure you are following the podcast, either on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or if you listen to podcasts anywhere else, because some of us do, make sure you follow it there as well so you don't miss out on anything. Recruiting Future Roundup Live will be back next month to review what we're doing. And, in the meantime, thank you, Ritu, and thank you to everyone for joining us here live today.
Thank you very much, Matt, for having me.
This is my show.